Now we're going to start tabling our panels, meaning we're going to put our face fabric and our lining together and put in our side hems and mark our pleats. So the first step is I've got my fabric panel laid out. I've got the wrong side up, the right side down, and I've got the hem away from me. I've got the top of the panel close to me, and I'm going to fold the fabric down to where I need it to get our finished length. And our finished length is going to be 34 inches. So I'm going to make sure I get it right on this side, and then I'm going to come down to the other side of the table and measure to make sure I get my 34 inches. Once you've got your fabric folded over at your finished length, then you're going to iron in that fold all the way across the panel as far as you can reach over. Part of our panel, because we have a width and a half, part of our panel is going to hang off the table, but we'll shift everything over later so that we can finish tabling that part of the panel too. Now we're going to put our buckram in the top of the drapery panel. And this is kind of a stiff paper, this buckram, and I've got 4-inch buckram that I'm using here. If you can't find 4-inch buckram, you may be able to find a bigger sheet of buckram that you're going to have to cut down into 4-inch strips. But that'll work too. You want your buckram size, the width of it, to be the finished width before the pleating. And we know from our figures from before that was 72 inches. So our panel laying here is actually wider than 72 inches because we're going to put our side hems in. So we're going to put the buckram in 3 inches away from the edge of the fabric so that it's not in the side hem. So I'm going to lift up the fabric and then put the buckram in, trying to make sure that I get it close to that 3-inch mark and that it's smooth all the way across. Fold your fabric back over, and you can kind of tap your buckram to make sure it's clear up in that fold. Once I've got the buckram in to the top of the panel, I'm just going to give it a quick iron to smooth it out. And then I'm going to cut off the excess fabric right at where the bottom of that 4-inch buckram is. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to show, but it'll just get a little of that excess fabric out of there. And what I'm going to do, just because it makes it a little bit easier later, I'm going to continue cutting down this half width of the fabric, even though it's not on the table right now. But I know I need to cut off about 4 or 5 inches. But it'll be easier to do it now than later. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just need to get some of the excess out. Next, we're going to lay our lining on top of our face fabric. I'm going to put the wrong side of the lining down on the fabric, and I'm going to try to match up the seam of the lining with the seam on the fabric. The other thing that you need to keep in mind when you put the lining on top of the fabric is that we want the lining to be about 1 inch shorter than the bottom of the hem. So 1 inch away from the bottom of the hem of the face fabric is where we start the lining fabric. And again, I want to make sure that I've got this seam lined up. I'll spread it across. And our lining is not quite as wide as our face fabric, but that's not going to be a problem either. We still have plenty to fold in for our side hems. Next, I'm going to iron it, give it a quick iron. I have some excess lining at the top here, and I'm going to cut off so that I end up with just 2 inches of lining above our face fabric. And I can kind of feel where the face fabric is. And it does not have to be perfect, It's just kind of an approximate cut, but this will make it easier to fold down a shorter amount when we attach our lining to the face fabric. And again, I'm gonna, just because it doesn't have to be perfect, I'm just gonna get this excess cut off right here. Once we've got that cut off, I'm going to fold under the lining. And I'll fold it all the way across the table, and what I want to have is about 1/4 of an inch of the face fabric showing. Once I've got that folded the way I like it, I'm going to grab my iron and I'm going to iron that down. Iron that fold flat. Next, we're going to fold the lining back, and I'm going to put a bead of glue along this folded edge of the lining. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is kind of just a glue base to keep the lining in place. And then later when we sew in the pleats, that's going to really connect the lining with the face fabric. But until we can get it to that point, this just helps us connect them. After I've got it glued, I'm going to do a quick iron to help set the glue a little bit. Now that we've got our buckram in, our panel, and our lining attached to the face fabric, we're going to do our side hem. And we're going to do a double 1.5 inch side hem, meaning we're going to fold up 3 inches. And again, if you don't have the lines on the table, we're going to fold up 3 inches all the way down the panel. Iron that. And then we're going to fold in so that we get our 1.5 width, or 1.5 inch side seam. And then iron that in place. We're going to pin it to hold it. Down here at the bottom where we have our hem, it's a good idea to put a drapery weight in the side hem. It gives a little weight to the drapery and helps it to hang a little nicer. So we just put this in the fold. In fact, I'm going to go clear over to the second fold so it's really in there well. Just like with when you did the bottom hems in the lining and the face fabric, whatever method you prefer to use to do the hem, do the same for the side hem. Whether it's hand stitching, blind hemmer, or even doing a hemming stitch on your machine. Our next step is to mark our pleats on the top of the drapery panel. We're going to use the pattern that we made before, and I'm going to lay it down this way for this panel because on this panel my full width is on the table first, so my overlap is on this side. The other panel that I make is going to be a mirror image, so I needed to make the return first because the half width was laying here. Our drapery panels are mirror images with the half widths on the outer side of each panel. So we're going to lay this down, matching up our seam and the edge of our panel. And I'm going to use just a regular fabric marker. You don't want to use a fabric marker that is a disappearing marker because your marks may disappear before you actually get your pleats sewn in. So I like to use a regular fabric marker. I'm going to start at this end. I'm going to mark at each mark that I marked on the pattern. all the way down until we get to the seam. We don't need our pattern anymore for a moment. Wherever I had a pleat, and I should have shown you this, wherever there was a pleat, I made a P and then I made an S where it was a space. So now I know these bigger spaces are my pleats, so I'm going to put a pin in the middle of each pleat to kind of hold the lining and the buckram and fabric together until I get it over to the sewing machine. So I'm going to pin, like I said, in the center of each of the pleats. Okay, so our width is almost done, this width that's on the table, but before I pull it over, there's a couple of things I want to do. The first thing is where I have the two seams laying on top of each other, the lining seam and the fabric seam, I'm just going to put a couple of pins in, connecting the two, the lining and the fabric, so that it doesn't shift when I pull the fabric and lining over the table to get to the rest of the drapery panel. The other thing that I like to do with this pattern piece is to lay it on the bottom by the hem of the panel. And when it's down here, I mark with a pin where the center of each space is. So wherever I have an S, I'm going to put a pin all the way down the panel, the part of the panel that's on the table right now. This is going to help keep our lining and fabric together, and then it's also going to help us when we fan fold our drapery panel later. These pins are going to be at the back of each of the spaces, and it's going to make it easier to do our folding. Now we've got this whole part of this panel tabled, and we're going to pull over the panel until the other side is on the table. We're going to kind of straighten it out, try and keep everything square and straight, and get things smoothed out. Once we've got our panel moved over on the table, I'm going to cut off my 4.5 inches off of this half width that I figured we needed to cut off when I did our form for how to figure our pleats and spaces. I'm actually going to go ahead and cut the face fabric and the lining all together and just make a few marks at 4.5 inches. And then I'll cut that off. All the way down the panel. And now I'm going to flip the lining out of the way and work with the face fabric for a minute. I'm going to take my measuring tape again and make sure that I have this folded at the top at our 34-inch finished length mark. Once I've got that measured, I'm going to iron. We've got our buckram in there. Make sure it's clear up at the top of that fold, and I'm going to iron this down. Then I'll fold our lining back over. And iron it down. We're going to pull back the lining again at the top and just run our line of glue along that top edge again. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We'll fold it back over and iron it in place. Next, we're going to fold in this second side hem. Again, doing the double 1.5 inch hem, so I'm going to fold up at 3 inches all the way down the panel and then iron it. Once we've got that ironed, I'm going to fold in to make our 1.5 inch side panel. I'm going to put a drapery weight again in this bottom part of our side hem, in that fold. Fold it all under and then pin the side hem. Now you would go ahead and, whatever method that you prefer, sew your side hems. Next, we're going to lay our pattern back out onto our panel at the top so that we can mark the 2 pleats that are on this half width. So using the fabric marker again, just going to mark the pleats, and then I'll put a pin in the center of each pleat. Next, I put our pattern piece back at the bottom of our panel, and there's only one more space left to mark, so I'm going to put a pin in there where that space will be. Now that our panel is completely tabled, we've got our top buckram in, we've got our side seams in, we've got our pleats and spaces marked. We're going to take the panel over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew in all of the pleats.